welcome everyone. Welcome to the 22-23 school year. It's really exciting to start a new year. As some of you, I know some of you who know me a little bit, you know I love the start of the school year and the excitement, the rush. I remember the new backpacks, the new uniform, if you went to school with uniform, or if you were fortunate enough, maybe you got new clothes, or maybe you got something passed down from your older sibling if you were in the type of family where you shared things. And in some cases also you got to get away from your parents, which was always fun after a long summer. So welcome to the new school year. I'm so excited to be with you again for the Psychology Lunch and Learn. Some of you, as I said, I recognize your names and I know you're already fantastic students, but I'm hoping that today I'll be able to share some tips that will help you with completing assignments more efficiently and with being better organized. Please prepare your questions, ask lots of questions, and we will hopefully have some really good conversation. Today, we're going to go through a PowerPoint that I put together. I can send you some notes. We can share with you some notes after the session. And you should always feel free to reach out and ask questions if you have them. So I wanted to start off by talking about getting organized. I'm a big stickler for organization. I think organization is everything when you're a student. It's also everything when you are a professor. It can make the difference between your week being really rough and your week going fairly well. So even when you face hardship, if you have a structure already in place for helping you out, that can make a huge difference. So one thing that I always start off with is reading the assignments and figuring out a work schedule. So what I'll do is I'll put together a calendar for the week or to-do lists for the week. There are different ways to do this, different ways to organize yourself, but you could have a calendar or you could have a to-do list where you map out everything you need to do during any given week. So if you know that you have readings every week and you have an idea of what your work schedule looks like, what your family schedule looks like, if you have more than one job, you know where your free time is. If you do volunteer work, you know when you're not going to be busy doing your volunteer work. And so you can map out times for doing those assignments and put yourself on a routine. If you have a routine, if you know that, let's say, every Saturday morning, you're waking up at 7 a.m. and you're doing your readings, that's one way to go about things. Or you could map things out where, if you have a long commute and you take a commute where you're not driving, you do some of your readings on the train or subway. Or if someone else is driving, you do the readings while that person drives or something of that sort. So there are different ways of organizing yourself and optimizing your time. And that's what we're going to work towards today. All right. So if you have a paper that's due, the first thing to do for psychology students and for other students, depending on what formatting your particular discipline uses, is to set up that paper following the rules of whether it's APA, MLA, Chicago. What are the rules for formatting your paper and how do you set up that document? One of the things that I do is I create a template for myself. I did this when I was a student where I would create a template, and the template would be an automatic template for my papers where I'd have, it's 12 points times New Roman, not 2 points. Who can read 2 points? So it's 12 points times New Roman or 11 points Calibri. That's the APA style chosen fonts. 11 points Georgia you can also use, but 12 points times New Roman is really the traditional one that everyone expects. Most psychology papers, unless it's a letter or a memo, it has to be double spaced. And the pages go to the top right if you are a psychology student. So I'm talking psychology because I'm a psychologist. I'm the associate director of the psychology program. And as you can see, that's a psychology lunch and learn. But if your particular program uses APA, this is a good rule of thumb to always, have page numbers, always double space. It makes it easier for your professors to read your papers. And you should have a title page. Remember, you can't use the excuse of, you're harming trees. It's digital. Your assignments are due online. You're not submitting actual papers. So there's no excuse for not having a title page. And the title page is going to contain your name. It's going to contain a variety of different things that identify the assignment and you and the course. And you should have a date on it as well, so that your professor, knows that this is the correct assignment, even if there's something else that indicates it might be something different. And you should save the document. When you save the document, and this is something that may seem intuitive to some of you, not so much for others, but what you want to do is have the course number in the document name and have the assignment and your name. So for example, if you're taking Intro to Psych, PSY 101, paper 1.JDO. So that's the course number, the name of the assignment, and your name. And that's a good way for you to keep track of your assignments, because if every single assignment is called Jane Doe, if that's your name, then that's a problem, because you won't be able to distinguish one file from another. And also you want to have your name and the assignment in the file name, so that when your professor downloads the file, and many of us download the files instead of grading them directly on Blackboard, we have the possibility of actually seeing whose work it is. And also, it's a great thing on Blackboard when you can see, whose work it is as well, even if you're not downloading files. Okay, so the first step is obviously reading the assignment. You don't want to get started just having done the readings and not having read what the actual assignment is. You want to be very clear on what the assignment is, take notes, map out what the different steps are that you need to complete in order to do this assignment. And you're going to read the assignment again. The idea is you start off reading the assignment and you also end with reading the assignment, because you're checking and making sure that you've done what you needed to do to maximize your potential for getting a grade that you're happy with. You're going to gather your materials next. So reading assignments for the course. So in some cases, let's say, for example, if you are taking developmental psych, you have in developmental psych 2 textbooks, and then you have supplemental readings also. You want to do all of the readings before you start the assignment. You don't want to just do one reading. And that means doing your readings early, doing them ahead. So you have the syllabus ahead of time. That means that you can do the readings on the syllabus ahead of time. If you're waiting for a weekly folder to open, once that weekly folder does open right away, download the material and go through that material. Take notes as you read. Take notes. If you are someone who prints out papers and then takes notes on the paper, take notes there. Take notes in a word processing document. So, regardless of whether you're using Word, you're using Google Docs, whatever it is that you are using, take notes. And it's a great idea to actually every semester for each class to have just a notes document where you take notes every single day. When I sometimes teach in live, when I teach synchronously, what I sometimes do is I have a master note document for the class, and every week I would ask a different student to take notes for the day, and like that we all had shared notes for the class. I went to a college where they had official note takers, and you had to then pay for notes. So I decided when I became a professor that I was going to make sure my students didn't have to pay, that they had the best notes possible, and that we were sharing something in that way. But in this case, because you're doing things asynchronously, that is an option. There are ways to do that. And there are also ways you can collaborate with others in the class, but your own personal notes and your own thoughts about the readings are really, really what matters. Because again, this is about expressing yourself and showing that you've learned something, that you've processed something, and that you're integrating knowledge into what you already know. All right. So once you've read all of the course materials, if the assignment says you need outside sources, go look for outside sources. Look for them through official channels if possible, meaning look for them through the library. Use the PsycInfo database. If you are a psych major, use the ERIC database, use the sociology databases, use history databases. There are all sorts of databases that you can use to find additional material, and they are fantastic. If you are a little bit more advanced and slightly more confident in your ability to discern what's good material, what's not good material, use scholar.google.com. It's a great free way to look for materials without having to log in and remember your CUNY ID, which you have to remember for logging into the library. And sometimes, you're on your phone because you have, a lunch break or something like that, and you're just looking, for your assignments, and you're thinking, what can I find? So scholar.google.com is wonderful for, that lunch break, search for something. If you're at work and you have your phone or you have a computer and certain things aren't blocked. Okay, so you're going to have a ton of assignments this semester. Some of them are going to be really fascinating. Some of them are going to be less engaging, but the idea is that you're going to approach all of them with the same level of seriousness, with the same level of organization, so that you can do well and give yourself the best chance to succeed, because that's really what it's about. It's about you building the future that you want and taking control of your education and feeling empowered to do so. I wanted to talk about discussion board assignments, since those are pretty common at SPS. Okay, in psychology, there are some classes that have discussion boards and assignments every single week. In some stats classes, you have 2 discussion board assignments per week. Yeah, a lot, I know. And it is a lot. It's a lot for the professors to grade. It's a lot for you to write, but they can be so much fun. I know some of you are probably thinking, how can stats assignments be fun? They can be. And, in terms of the discussion board assignments, again, the same thing applies as to other assignments. Read the instructions in your course site. If you go to the Getting Started tab, usually there's going to be a section called Discussion Board under Getting Started. For every single course, the guidelines will be slightly different. In psychology, we tend to ask for 300 to 500 words for your original discussion board post, but it varies by class. In some courses, we ask for more. In other courses, we ask for a little bit less. And different assignments have different requirements, even though they're on the discussion board. So read the instructions under Getting Started, read the instructions on the syllabus, and as with every other assignment, read the course materials before you begin. So do your readings and take notes again, and then complete the assignment in a word processing program. If you complete the assignment in that little dialog box that is on Blackboard, you may find yourself, having some difficulty, because the dialog box can feel a little restrictive. It's, again, you're putting yourself in a box to a certain extent, whereas you can be a little more free if you're using, some sort of notes program, Word, or you're using Google Docs or something else. I like to do my assignments, or I like to do work there. Even, as a professor, when I post announcements, I usually type out the announcement elsewhere, and then I copy and paste into the dialog box on Blackboard, because that gives you the possibility of running a better spell check and grammar check. And then after that, I post. So again, remember, the discussion board assignments are really important. You are paying close attention to the guidelines. If it says 300 words, you are counting. In the word processing program, there's a little feature sometimes that allows you, so on Google Docs and also in Word, you can look at your word count, and you can figure out if you are close to what the expectation for that assignment is. And that's one of the great things about the copy and paste method. Okay, so I talked about sources. So what sources do you use for assignments? Whether it is discussion board assignments or papers, obviously the assigned readings are the first thing. You want to prove that you have read the assigned readings, right? And how do you prove that you've read the assigned readings? Not by quoting from the readings. I mean, quoting, you could literally sit down and see one sentence and not read the entire article and just paste that, and your professor won't necessarily think, oh, this person really read the article. No, the professor will probably think, oh, you copied something from the article. And in psychology in particular, we don't really value quotes unless they are really for technical purposes. So we tend to see quotes as showing that you didn't necessarily understand the material, so you're directly using the words from the material as opposed to putting it into your own words. We love to hear your thoughts as your professors. We want to hear what you think. We want to hear how you're seeing the material. We want to hear how you're making sense of it, how you process it in comparison to what you've read before, how you process it in comparison to, in some cases, lived experience, how you process it in comparison to something else that you read. So it could be that you have 2 articles, for example, on early childhood education. One maybe covers a more traditional approach to education. The other one covers Montessori. And so you talk about both and you're comparing the 2. So compare and contrast is a good way really to think about your readings in some cases. And, that's where you take notes. And that's where also you go into looking for additional sources. So if you're looking for extra sources, if the assignment says you need to bring in 2 extra sources, my suggestion is always go for 3. And go for primary sources, which are peer-reviewed empirical articles. So empirical means evidence-based, basically. So it's based on observation. Or so you can also go for theoretical articles. And secondary sources would be literature reviews. So literature reviews is when there's a summary of everything that's been found on a particular topic. And we'll talk more about formats of articles and what's a good source, what's not a good source later on this term in another Lunch and Learn. And next term, we also have the possibility of going over that. Book chapters can be very valuable. Again, they're digital books. So some of you I know have been away from school for a little while. Everything is online now, just about. When I was in college, some things were online, but not everything. But now just about everything is there. And there's a lot that is actually free. So, there are certain books that you can find a little bit everywhere, but we also have a great library. Don't listen to the naysayers who say CUNY doesn't have enough. CUNY has a wonderful wealth of resources, and it's just a matter of your perfecting your skills and giving yourself the time to do the search. The librarians are there to help you. Send them emails, ask your professors for tips, go to office hours. Research reports. So research reports from the government, for example, that would be really, really good. So avoid using blogs, avoid using TED Talks, prioritize literature from the past decade and seminal work. If you want to talk to me, let's say you have an assignment for your course where you're being asked to talk about gun laws and you are writing using material from 2002, that's a problem. You should be writing using material from, let's say, 2012 on. And there are just so many different ways to find this. And we can talk about that more extensively. And again, I highly encourage you to talk to your professors. So when you're writing a paper, when you are doing an assignment, the first thing you need to figure out is your thesis. What is a thesis? It's your central argument. That is going to be the main point you are making, and it's going to need to be in your words. It should directly address the topic. It should come from the materials you read for your assignment. And again, you should write down your thoughts as you're reading and then compose a statement and then revise. And this is a common theme you'll hear from me: write, revise. And again, some of you prefer typing, so type revise is a better way to put it. So let's give an example of a thesis. An example, and this comes from the Bedford Guide for College Writers. I do recommend that book if you are someone who struggles a little bit or needs to brush up on skills. It is available through our library. Although companies often have legitimate concerns that lead them to monitor employees' internet usage, from expensive security breaches to reduce productivity, the benefits of electronic surveillance are outweighed by its costs to the employee's privacy and autonomy. That is a thesis statement. Here's what you see in this statement. You see some factual information, and you also see a perspective. And that's often what you're going to get in a thesis statement: factual information and a perspective. Now, if you are a psychology student, you need references in this. And we'll talk about that, but we'll talk about that next time when we get into APA. I decided to be kind and not annoy you excessively with references and references needing to be everywhere. But as you probably know, any statement of fact requires a reference. So we would put the references, for example, after, employees' internet usage, or we would put it after expensive breaches of security to reduce productivity. Okay. All right. So your first step in planning your paper, planning your discussion board post, write an outline, put your thesis at the top of the page, and then list major points that you're going to make in support of your thesis. Add arguments that justify each major point. So it's basically filling in, your drawing. So you start off with one big point, then you have 4 subpoints maybe, and for each subpoint, you're making an additional 2, 3, maybe 4 points. This is what it looks like. So the central argument, although employers have always monitored employees, electronic surveillance is more efficient than other methods. That would be an example. And so the supporting points would be employers can gather data in large quantities. Electronic surveillance can be continuous. Electronic surveillance can be conducted secretly with keystroke login programs. And each point is going to need to be backed by an example from your readings, an example from your research. Now, again, when do you use citations? Anytime you make a statement of fact, when you're describing past research, also when you describe a theory. So a lot of citing, especially if you're in the social sciences, if you are in psychology, lots of cites. If you are in sociology, a little less, but still a lot of things, you're citing a lot of things. If you are in the youth studies program, again, you're citing a lot of things. If you're in biology, you also have to back everything up because those are evidence-based fields. If you're writing fiction, run wild. Okay, so very quickly, I said I wouldn't bother you too much, but of course I have to do a little bit on citations because I'm a psychologist. That's what we do. We cite things. So if there's one author, it would be a narrative citation would be McLeod, 1998, and a parenthetical citation is open the parentheses, McLeod, comma, 1998, close the parenthesis. Now, McLeod, 1998 is a seminal article. All of these articles here are seminal articles, so that's why I'm not following my own rule of not going back further than 2002. And I could probably spend 5 hours talking about the brilliance of each of these pieces, but I'm not going to do that. So you see for 2 authors, Albee and Gullotta, that's the narrative citation. And for the parenthetical citation, you notice we are using the abbreviation. We're not writing out and fully, but it's the same format every time. It's author and date for the parenthetical citation. It's author and then date in a parenthesis for the narrative citation. So narrative is when it's part of the text, and parenthetical is still part of your narrative, but it's in a parenthesis, and it's not part of the sentence in the same way. It's part of the sentence in a slightly different way. Okay, 3 or more authors. Again, if there's more than 3 authors, you can use the et al. And so it's Repetti et al. It's AL period, comma, 2002. That's in parenthesis. You could say Repetti, Taylor, and Seaman if they're just 3 people. Repetti and colleagues is another way to do the narrative conversation about the authors. And Repetti et al. Also, that's the typical way. Again, prioritize varying your sentences and modes of citation. Focus on one author. Focus on the authors, not the research is something you want to avoid. Also, avoid listing names, abbreviating names, using titles, pronouns. There is a move to use the doctor title a little bit more, but thankfully for you, it's not in student papers yet. It's unfortunately coming to professional papers, but we'll talk about that at another time. I can tell you about some of the new trends when we talk about APA citations next time. So words and phrases to avoid in your paper. So words with life and death implications, vital, crucial, essential. So, if you say to me, it's essential that, all children have a phone, that's not true, obviously. It's not true. And some would actually argue against children having a phone. So avoid using that type of word that has dire implications. You can live without a phone. Those of us who were born pre-1990, we didn't have phones when we were kids. Avoid using slang in your assignments. First of all, your professor might be old enough not to understand your slang. Don't worry about it, but might not understand the slang. Second of all, this is a formal environment, whether it is the discussion board, an email to your professor, or an assignment. It's formal. You have a formal relationship. Avoid anything that's excessively colloquial or colorful. avoid, metaphors that refer to something in popular culture. Again, your professor might not get the reference, or in some cases, your professor will get the reference. But unless you're being asked to write about something related to popular culture, stay away from it, stick to research examples, or in some cases, literature examples. But if you're asked to write about your favorite TV show, be specific, give details, and connect your favorite TV show to the text. I know that those assignments do happen, for example, in family psychology, and I think in developmental, there's an assignment where you're asked to compare and contrast how adolescence is portrayed in the media versus how it's portrayed in the textbook. So again, connect everything to the textbook. So not everything can be paraphrased. That's the final advice. So certain technical terms, use the technical term. Legal terms, use the legal term. Laws or statutes, feel free to quote. No one's expecting you to rewrite a law. No one's expecting you to rewrite a statute. And just some more final tips. If you say several studies, you must cite several studies. If you say, according to McLeod, you have to cite McLeod. If you say prior investigations have found, you have to cite or list prior investigations. If you're writing about women, if you're saying women X, Y, and Z, I want you to cite research about women. And again, it's always about being precise, being specific, paying attention. Let's now wrap up with common errors. So the year of publication of the article is not the year the research was conducted. So sometimes I see students, and these are brilliant students who really get the research, but they make very small mistakes that we need to tell them more about, and we need to encourage students to learn more about the process, such as saying research conducted in 1990. The research was not conducted in 1990. It was published in 1990. There's a possibility it was conducted in 1988 or 1987. In some cases, you might even have research that was data that was collected, let's say in 1990, that's still being analyzed in 2012. Hopefully not 2022, but 1990. Misgendering authors. Try not to use gender pronouns at all. Just use the last name. That's the easiest way. Academics are used to being called by their last names, or doctor or professor. Professor is a good common catch-all, so you don't offend someone who doesn't have a PhD. Now, quoting excessively, only quote when there is no other word to use. Listing the author's university affiliations. Academics move around a lot. We go to different institutions. So if you say Professor H, who is at this school, chances are Professor H has moved to a different school already. So to wrap up, read the guidelines for the paper, write an outline, read through your outline, read through your paper a final time before hitting submit, and also read through the instructions one last time before you hit submit. We now have dedicated time for Q&A. And thank you to those of you who were able to come. Let's wrap up. We'll do 5-minute Q&A. And let's see. I see questions. Do I have questions? Okay. Are we going to receive a transcript of the meeting? A transcript will be available. The video will be available. And the events, our lovely events team. So we have Ryan and Molly. Thank you again for your assistance. And thank you for everything that you do. That will be available. Can I explain which in-text citation should be used again? When do I use McLeod 98 versus McLeod 98 in parenthesis? Okay. So it depends on what you are writing and how you're writing. So if your sentence is McLeod wrote about, economic disenfranchisement and its consequences, then you would write McLeod parenthesis 1998 parenthesis 1998, and then the rest of your sentence. If you are writing a sentence such as prior work examining economic disenfranchisement has found X, Y, and Z, that's when you would use the parenthetical citation. So a narrative citation is when the author is part of the sentence. So when you're saying McLeod found X, Y, and Z, and there's a date that comes after the name of the author, The parenthetical citation is when the author is not part of the sentence, but the author's findings are part of the sentence, and you then indicate where the findings come from. That's a really good question, and it's very nuanced. It's hard work. Even for me, I've been doing this for 20 years, using APA for 20 years, and I still have, some challenges sometimes, and always have to brush up and look up again. And, sometimes I have debates with my co-authors about certain things. All right, so if an article was republished, you can, what you can do is you can either cite one version or the other. So like, say, for example, Erik Erikson, Childhood in Society. That was originally published in 1959. It was republished in 1963. Then there have been so many different editions. You can reference whatever edition you actually have, or you can reference the original edition. Whatever edition. What website would I recommend for APA citations? I would recommend apastyle.org. So apastyle.org, which is through the APA website, the American Psychological Association website. That is the best site. They have tutorials. They have a wide variety of different things. If you are a psychology student, in every single psychology site, there is a APA citation tab. There's and I put together a video for students to help you learn APA, and there are all these resources that are there. It's very important if you are a psychology student to learn APA, because that's how we write in psychology, and it governs everything. I will also, my next Lunch and Learn on the 22nd is going to be focused on learning APA style. So let's wrap up with a few questions. Okay. Popular press. So popular press is a tricky one. Unless you are being asked to cite the popular press, my suggestion is no. Popular press is a tertiary source. So it's not even a secondary source, it's a tertiary source in many cases. So the New York Times, they didn't, unless it's something where the New York Times actually did the research and you are citing them, more often than not, they are giving you their interpretation of a press release that was sent to them by a psychological association or by some other entity, and they haven't actually read the research, or in some cases they did read the research, but they have a different perspective. And what you want to do is always cite the original source. So good sources are peer reviewed, and that's because that's the highest standard, and that's considered, where you get the best information. Citing textbooks is appropriate for your courses, but once you move to the graduate level, you should not be citing textbooks. So undergrads, you can cite textbooks, enjoy. Graduate students, unless you're doing something specifically for a class, you should not be citing textbooks. And that's simply because you're moving closer to the professional standard. At a professional level, we do not cite textbooks because, again, textbooks are tertiary sources, secondary sources in some cases. You will be able to access video and transcript. Okay, so let's say you attend a lecture and you like a point that someone makes. Can you cite that? You can. You can cite a TED Talk. If you actually go to apastyle.org, or you can actually find guidelines for how to cite a TED Talk. And if you have the possibility of buying the APA style manual, buy it if you're a psychology student, because it's 100% worth having. There's an abbreviated version of it. There are versions of it online, and you want the latest version, which is version 7, and it's slightly different. Psych Info is where you find peer-reviewed articles, Psych Info. So Psych Info is the official database. It's APA Psych Info now. The APA purchased it, and that is the official database for psychology articles. One of my pet peeves, don't cite Psychology Today. Psychology Today is basically People magazine for psychologists. It's not viewed as credible by most psychologists, but it is an incredible source for lay people. But for you as students, avoid Psychology Today, avoid Wikipedia. Don't cite your grandma. Your grandma is wonderful and fantastic, or at least I hope she is, but don't cite her, because I have seen that. but you can give examples. So for example, if you're asked to give an example in support of something, you could give an example of something your grandmother said and connect it to the readings. Because again, it's always about going back to the readings. We are out of time. And I am, again, thankful for your presence. And I wish you a very wonderful school year. If there's anything you need, send me an email, isabel.alicia@cuny.edu. And you can also email the psychology department. Have a very, very, very good day.